I hope you are well. I hope things are going well with you. This is Aaron Wells. This is Aaron Wells of North Philly Project, the executive director. And these are our North Philly Project Presents Wellness Chronicles. It's a delight to come on every Monday. Wasn't with you last Monday, and we'll talk about that reason why. Um, Today is a very special time for me in conversation with you and being able to talk about and honor somebody really dear to me who transitioned and left us a week ago today. As a matter of fact, right about now. And I just want to honor his presence and his memory. Um, he is the inspiration for North Philly Project. North Philly Project is a 9-year-old nonprofit and based in Philadelphia, obviously North Philadelphia. And I've had the honor of being executive director for the last 9 years. None of this happens without the gentleman that we're going to talk about tonight and spend time just honoring his memory, his legacy, his life, his impact, his influence. This is Aaron Wells, North Philly Project presents the Wellness Chronicles, community conversations exploring life in marginalized communities and how to ignite social change. That's the premise of our conversations. That's why I come on Mondays to be able to share issues in communities, specifically North Philadelphia, and to be able to talk about solutions and how we as a community can build into our wellness, build into the wellness that we both desire and that we deserve. Tonight is special. Um, Conversation for me are about one thing tonight, and that is honoring the life, the influence, and impact and legacy of Mr. Harold Barnes. All right, Harold transitioned to be in the presence of the Lord a week ago today. Um, Harold, um, in leaving us and transitioning, went through a really tough stretch. Um, as 86 years old when he left us, 86 rotations around the planet, and just fighting for quality of life over the last few years. And so his departure, though painful, is a blessing. And we honor he who is now our ancestor, he who is now eternal. We honor him and just want to talk about his life tonight. Um, may have a couple of people join in, but if not, it is my particular honor to be able to do this. If you see it and when you see this, please make sure that you post this, make sure that you share this conversation, if you would, um, on all of your social media platforms. And it's sort of bittersweet, right? So the inspiration to set up platforms like this with North Philly Project come from this one man, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Um, and so it's bittersweet that at this point of life, I'm 63 years old, and I met him when I was 12 years old, and so since the age of 12, right, for 51 years, he has been a constant figure in my life. Um, and for his physical presence to be absent from us, it's an adjustment. It's an adjustment in many ways, but the strength of the life, the strength of the life leaves a legacy where those spaces that would be empty are actually filled. His presence will always be with me, and with so many others that we have come to love and to know over the years. And so I want to talk about the life of Harold Barnes, who is a friend, father, mentor, brother, uncle, counselor, and a lover of North Philadelphia. Harold, when he got out of the military, he moved to North Philadelphia. He's originally from Winston-Salem, down here in North Carolina, moved to Philadelphia, North Philly, joined the Philadelphia Police Force, um, and as a police officer, was stationed in North Philadelphia. Family lived in North Philadelphia, and so Harold himself became iconic with community and with neighborhood in North Philly. And so having him be a part of my life is a part of my North Philadelphia. They're simultaneously our blessings. They're synonymous of each other. When we who know Harold think of Harold, we think of North Philly, and it's hard to um, have been in that arena, in that atmosphere, um, and not think of North Philly, and not at the same time think of Harold Barnes. I want to talk about the impact first and foremost, and we'll figure this out. This is Aaron Wells again, North Philly Project. Get an opportunity. Make sure you share these conversations, all of our Monday night conversations on your social media platforms. You can email them out. I do it all the time. Um, but this one right here is kind of intimate and special for me. Um, the impact of Harold Barnes. When we launched North Philly Project 9 years ago, this month, it happened because many of the people who played basketball under his tutelage got together, started getting phone calls. Look, we want to honor Harold. Many of us called him Mr. Barnes or Coach Barnes or Harold, right? And so we wanted to honor him. And what happened was, and I believe it was 13th for Brown. There's a rec center somewhere on Brown Street in Philadelphia. There was a collection, a gathering of some of the greatest ball players, some of the best ball players, some of the most iconic ball players from, um, our era of the late '60s, early '70s, all through the '70s, and early '80s. Many of the iconic ball players, especially of the '70s, um, the guys from Dobbins Tech, my guy Leroy Choice, my guy Horace Owens, the Gratz guys, Joe Gore, Gary Devlin, Greg Pouncey, Mike Levister, Keith Johnson, the late wonderful friend of mine, Joe Woods, the left hand assassin. Um, the cats from Franklin showed up. Edison, those guys showed up. We came from all over, and we came to honor Harold. Everybody didn't play high school basketball. We all played some type of sport, right? We were out there. But not only did the ball players come, we grew up in the gang war era in the '70s. And at that gathering, the gangsters showed up, you know. The mom showed up. Everybody showed up to honor Harold. And so when we gathered that day, it was 10 years ago, when we gathered and had this magnificent dinner and testimony to Harold, and many of us spoke. Um, the late great Joey Temple, Batman was there. Many people know Batman as an activist, civil rights activist in the city, a voice of the people. But before that, he was an announcer at all of the at the Simon Gratz basketball games in the '70s and down Sunny Hill and Baker League. But he was also from the neighborhood and was from the Tenderloins, and so everybody knew Batman and Top Cat from the Village. These are the names. I mean, you had the ball players, and you had the gangsters, and you had the people who were just those who navigated life in such a way that they needed the supports and the fellowship that came from these centers that Harold operated. And so we all gathered. And when we gathered, we looked out at this gathering of survivors, of men and women who had come through the streets, who had come through the trauma that's created growing up in urban areas like North Philadelphia, the people who had come through addictions and incarcerations and marriages, and who had become fathers and mothers and grandfathers and grandmothers, and who had become teachers and scholars and business owners. We all came together, and when we looked out, we said, wow, there's another us, another one of us out there. There's another person who was a younger Aaron or a younger Gary or a younger Joe or a younger Tank Hayden, right? And we looked out and we said, how do we reach them? How do we do for them what Harold Barnes did for us? And so in doing so, the concept of North Philly Project was birthed. uh, we decided that North Philly, our beloved North Philly, would be the uh, galvanizing point to bring us back together in an effort to go back into community. For many of us, the community we took so much from, and we wanted to be able to give back. And we wanted to give back specifically in the spirit of Harold Barnes. Dig? We wanted to give back in the spirit that was given to us. That man, and so that was 10 years ago. So I was early 50s. And so the impact was so strong, the impact was so lasting, it was so overwhelming. We had to let it pour out into our community so that the change that many of us experienced because of our relationship with that life called Harold Barnes, could now be experienced in others. You with me? Yeah. So um, the impact of Harold Barnes' life is such that it inspires to do. It inspires to be. It inspires to move forward. It inspires change. That's a life well lived. And so I want to start with the impact of Harold Barnes and how my friend Edward Cookie Fife has been had his program and been a director down at the Cecil B. Moore Rec Center, formerly Old Connie Mack. Us old heads know this Connie Mack. For over 40 years, Cookie's been there. Well, Cookie was the very first participant at the Police Athletic League, the POW Center that Harold opened up at 27th and Haggard. Cookie was the very first player, first participant. Cookie was my point guard in high school with Simon Gratz. He's been one of my best friends since seventh grade. And Cookie is a representation of the impact of Harold Barnes. Recently, when we dedicated the mural that was painted for Harold at 27th and York Street on the side of the North Penn Powell Center. And please, if you're in Philly and you get by there, please go by and just honor Harold by going to see the mural. At that dedication service, um, Cookie shared that the reason he does what he does was directly because of Harold Barnes and what Harold Barnes has done for him. His impact. How does this life inspire my life to do something great? How does this life inspire my life to emulate the work and the activity? And so Harold did that, and I am so gracious that God in his loving kindness allowed me to be impacted by the life of Harold Barnes. The influence of Harold. John Maxwell, the Christian leadership guru, once put out there that the definition of leadership is simply influence. Mhm. Harold was an influencer. His influence spoke volumes. His influence touched. It reached. It covered the lives of so many. It was Harold's imparted wisdom, his kindness, sometimes sternness, right, but always kind and wise. His empathetic heart, understanding what many of us was going through during that period of time. You must understand that many of us didn't have fathers in the home, or many of us have fathers who, just from an economic standpoint, had to grind and wasn't around because they were out making sure that we could have a roof over our head and food in our stomachs and clothes on our backs. Many of us came from households that really struggled, both economically and relationally. And Harold's influence was such that he allowed us to open our hearts and receive him in. Mhm. And he helped us interpret those things that was going on in our lives and helped us to see the best of family. And so because of that, many of us, you find us in the education field, a whole bunch of us in the coaching professions and fields and in ministry. And this all comes from the influence of the words and the kindness and the actions of this man, Harold Barnes, who took us places that we had never seen before through our travels and sports and exposed us so many things that we may not have seen if we did not find ourselves associated with his centers. And again, I want to emphasize we grew up in a gang war era, and as we talk about crime and the safety or lack of on the streets and where we see community at right now from that perspective, it was tough then. Wasn't automatic weapons, but we still had gangs every corner, every community. And his centers, first at 29th and Lehigh, and then at 27th and Haggard off of 27th and York, they became, in the middle of some really tough gang environment, they became safe havens, right? If you could get to the center, that was the ticket, right? If you could get to the center, you were safe because Harold made sure of that. But now listen, extended out of the center was his influence, because when guys heard up 29th Street or down 27th Street, two different same community, but two different neighborhoods. And so when you hear I'm going from the Tenderloins down to the Village, or I'm going from the Lodge through the Valley down to the Village, or from Diamond Street up to the Village, or up to the Tenderloins where he originally was, up 29th Street, or the Lodge, 28th and Huntington Street. These are gangs. And those people, when you went and they heard you were going to the PAL, you were off limits. When they heard you were going to play ball down at the PAL, Officer Barnes, yeah, you're good. You were off limits. And that was the influence of Harold. And you must understand, Harold was at times a beat walker as a police officer. He was embedded and entrenched in community, and people knew him. And by us being associated with him and his work and his effort and his love and his caring, we were safe. Harold was proud of the fact that in his center there were no fights. He was proud of the fact there was no graffiti on the walls, as it was outside everywhere you went in North Philly. Harold was proud of the fact that there was no graffiti on his walls. Harold was proud of the fact that children from different communities, different neighborhoods within the community would come, right? And this is where we began. Some of my lifelong friends are in neighborhoods that I would not have gone into consistently as a young man, maybe older, but not as a young man, if it had not been for Harold Barnes and his centers. And this is the influence of this man. So the impact of Harold is such that he was and is now a life changer. In May, when we dedicated the mural and got together to make that happen, because that's what he wanted. You know, we originally wanted to name a street after him, and the city of Philadelphia did not make that happen with us. We tried to do that for several years, and so the idea came up: what about a mural? Let's instead of naming the street after him, let's put him where people can see him. And I want to thank my guy Cookie, Edward Fife, for making sure that that mural was in the neighborhood, right? And so I want to thank my guy Larry Bell, who made the connections for us with the city, with the artists, to get this mural up for Harold Barnes. And my job, as usual, was to call people. Let's get it together, guys, and organize it. And we did that. And I just want to thank everybody who took the time, the effort, donated the money, made phone calls, came by the celebration, encouraged Harold about this. This was one of the proudest moments of his life. The influence and the impact that I'm speaking of brought community together. As a matter of fact, we were in the center conducting the ceremony. It was like 70 of us in there. It was a bunch of us inside that center, right? Social distancing as much as we could. This was just back in May, but across the street in the lot, there was a whole nother gathering from, and here's what I'm saying is this is the area called the Village, right there on 27th and York. Our brothers and sisters from all over, they had the grill set up, they were cooking, they were chilling out in the lot. So we actually had a double celebration because the center wouldn't have held everybody in, but they came up and they were across the street. And so we came out of the center, and there's my cousins and people from neighborhoods. Hey, yo, it was such a gathering That's the influence of Harold Barnes. That's the impact he had in these lives. And watch this. It wasn't just us who played for him. It was multi-generation. It was multi-generation. There were children and grandchildren there. Some who didn't know Mr. Harold Barnes because he had since moved down to retired and moved down back home, his home, North Carolina. But the kids knew who he was. So that's the guy up on the wall. That's the one daddy that you played for. That's the one everybody talks about. That's the impact. That's the legacy. That's a life well lived. And so I'm doing this tonight because Harold Barnes is truly one of the great loves of my life. He was my friend. He was my counselor, sometimes my pastor. He was a brother. I could tell him anything. I could bounce anything off of him and vice versa. We shared so many precious times, confidential times. We shared so many times just as men. In his later years, I was blessed to be one of the people who helped him, supported him. Most of his family still in the Philadelphia area. He's down in Winston-Salem. Myself, Antoine Terrell, Aaron Greer, hats off to you guys. I salute and love you. My guy, Gregory Bennett Muff. They're in the High Point area, the Kernersville area of North Carolina, near closer to Winston than I am. But we made it happen. We made it happen. Then there's his church family. Howard was a very spiritual man. He was a lover of the Lord Jesus Christ. That's how he got down. He was a lifelong and the oldest member of his church. That he was proud of that. He loved being that elder. He loved being that elder statesman, that elder spokesman. People would come check on and see Mr. Barnes, right? But he also had some younger people attached to him. And that was something about Harold, that youth attached itself to Harold, whether it was his nieces and nephews, whether it was children of friends and family. Youth attached themselves to Harold Barnes. So much of it had to do with his spirit and his attentiveness. Yeah. He was attentive to what you thought and what you heard. He saw you. And who doesn't want to be seen? And that was one of the impacts. That was one of the gifts. Harold saw you and he heard you. He would dialogue with you and engage in conversation with you. And it could be about you, not him. But then it was nice to hear his stories. 86 years old. That's a chunk of change. And he had the stories. And he would engage us with his stories, and we would be really wrapped up, right? We would be wrapped up in his stories because he was a historian. He would tell us about our North Philly, right? But he could tell you about his, he would tell you about his Carolina. And he would connect those in just this tapestry of life where Harold just shared with us and talked with us. And it was just great. Made you want to grow old. So you could have those stories. So you could have those stories too. Yeah. The influence of Harold Barnes, the impact of Harold Barnes in my life. Very important figure. If I were to ever write a book, I would have a chapter. In his later years, when his driving started scaring the heck out of us, me, I started taking him to Philly over the last 10 years, I believe. Yeah, about 10 years, the last decade. And prior to pandemic, we would go every couple of months. I drive, Harold, I go from my house and take the hour drive to his house, load him up, and we'd be off. He wouldn't say it, but he'd be ticked if I was a little late because Harold wanted to get to Philly as soon as possible. So we need to leave as early as possible, right? While it's old dark 30 outside, so we could get to Philly around noon, 2 in the afternoon. Because once he got there, he conducted business, banking and family. Then he'd go see his daughter across the bridge in Jersey, and he wanted to do that during life, right? And he was still driving up until I believe last year, the year before, we had to shut that down. But he was still driving. And actually last year, he would go to Philly. I'd take him to the airport. He'd rent a car, and off he was. And those rides were magical. I'm a music lover. People who know me know that. I love old R&B. I'm talking late 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. I just started venturing into the 90s, not much though, right? And we would share the magic music on our 8 hour trips, 16, right? Eight up, eight back. And we'd laugh, we'd joke, we'd stop to eat. And between our music and his naps, we would listen to the music, and then we call. And that was a great part of the trip, right? We get on because I had the Bluetooth in all the cars, and then we just get on the phone. We start calling people, and we just start thinking of people. Yo, let's call Sheldon. Let's call Pouncey. Let's call Simpson. Let's call Reggie. Let's call Harris. Let's call Joe Woods, Joe Gore. Let's call Jesse. Let's call Craig. Let's call George Clark. And so we would just call for 8 hours. We would just call people. Harold and his guys. He loved his guys. And as he grew older, as he aged, as his body began shutting down, as he would struggle a little more, hearing from his guys was the most important thing in the world to him. So 7 years ago, because Harold's birthday is November 14th, and a month from now, he would have been 87 years old. So 7 years ago, his daughter Michelle and the squad, North Philly Project, and the crew, we got together and threw him an 80th birthday party. I have the picture here in my house, and it was magical. It was wonderful. Our mentor, our friend, our brother, uncle, counselor, father, sometimes pastor. He celebrated his 80th birthday. What a great milestone for him. And the guys came out. The guys showed through, and it was always about the guys. He always talked about the guys. Now, that included the women. That included Dawn Staley, and that included my buddy Rita, who I always call his first daughter. But those who knew him, and we used to hang at those centers and play those basketball games and those softball games, and sometimes just be at the center and chilling, they all came out for the 80th birthday party. And so we've had these moments over the last 10 years where it was about giving back to Harold. Cookouts down in the village where the neighborhood would just come out and, yeah, Mr. Barnes is back in town. Or the dinner where we all got together for North Philly Project to begin building North Philly Project. Or the last December, after 2 years of COVID, when it was safer, he and I and Muff, we masked up. I picked them up. I brought them to Philly, and they came out. Everybody came out to the Cecil B. Moore Center. It was always a reunion for us, and they came to honor Harold, and it just made him feel so good. His body was starting to deteriorate, and his health was declining. You could see the decline, and he became frail. He was losing weight, but it was the energy of his guys. And he talked about that all the time. Wow, when I met you, you were young boys, and now you're grandfathers. And he was so proud of that. He was so proud of what we have become, who we are, our give back to community. He was always happy about the fact that we stayed connected one way or another. My guy Rodney Lee, I just texted him about Harold's transition and passing the other day. Rodney's out in Arizona. There's Rodney. Rodney's in Australia. He's a DJ in Australia. Stays connected via Facebook. Joined North Philly Project. Contributes, but he was always both Rodneys. Rodney's always contributing and wondering about Harold Barnes. This is Harold's influence. He's influenced the work and the life career of a man in Australia. And then there was the mural. His thought was, his concern was, Aaron, I really want to see this before I go. Before I leave and transition and go to be with my Lord and my mom, it would be great. And so we made it happen. And I salute everybody who made that happen, because you made that man's heart happy. And we came out. And here's the cool thing, that the Powell Center that he worked at so many years and became an iconic figure in, the current police officer at the Powell, they allowed us to have the ceremony there. We wanted to do it outside. It was too hot for him. It was this last year. It was this year, earlier this year, this summer, excuse me. And it was just too hot for him to be outside. They let us come in. We set it up. It was wonderful. People showed up. Rita and her family, they helped me. We got that thing done. And then when Harold came by, the Philadelphia police, where he served over 28 years, they came and honored him. Captains came out. One of the other great honors is that Lloyd Ayers, fire commissioner, retired from for the Philadelphia Fire Department, North Philly, and Lloyd Ayers was actually a member of Harold's first Powell Center. Do you know the feeling that gave Harold? That he could say, not just the All-American basketball players, not just the Don Staley's and the Reggie Jackson, the Horace Owens, and some of those great ball players that came from that center, but this black fire commissioner in that segregated, politically wild city of Philadelphia came not just from North Philly, but he is one of Harold's guys. And when we did one of the videos that you can find on the North Philly Project website, you can find a video that Anthony Rose did. Ant-Man, salute to you, buddy. Our early videographer, and put this wonderful video together. The video was done by Brent Hawthorne and his son. They came down to North Carolina along with Lloyd and his wife, and they came for one reason: to interview Harold. They came down, they drove down and sat on a Saturday in Harold's house, and they interviewed him, and created the video from that. Harold was so proud. And I'm going here with this, right? So when we had the mural dedication, Lloyd Ayers gave Harold his commissioner bars. Man, the impact. When a guy like Lloyd Ayers looks back at his life and says, I don't get here if it's not for Harold Barnes. You with me? When a Reggie Jackson, on the very first National McDonald's All-American basketball team, says in front of those 70 people when we did the mural dedication, that I do not become a high school All-American or go to the University of Maryland if it's not for a Harold Barnes in my life. Horace Owens, who 2 years later became a McDonald's All-American, says, I don't get here if it's not for Harold Barnes. Jeffrey Clark, who played high school phenom in basketball and football and baseball, and had a stellar career in St. Joe's, now an NCAA ref, who has ref Final Four games and a national championship, says, I don't get here if it's not for Harold Barnes. This is the impact. I can tell you now that in my life, with all the great things I've accomplished, excuse me, whether through as a pastor or as a director or a builder or a teacher, I don't do these things if I don't have the impact and influence of Harold Barnes in my life. And if you can live a life that can touch so many people as Harold Barnes' life, then you, my friend, have lived a life that was worth living. When your life, scripture says this, let me hit you with a little bit of it so you can really get the context of this. Anybody that's out there listening to this now or later, scripture says, unless a seed falls into the ground and dies, it stands alone. It says, but if it dies, it will bear fruit and its fruit will remain. It should have just said Harold. You should be able to turn to that scripture as a picture of Harold, because that is what his life was. That was the influence and the impact, that he sacrificed so many things. His daughter Michelle is similar to us in age, my age. So if I saw him all the time, then there was some sacrifice that went on so that others could be okay. He missed a lot of things in his personal life to make sure we got to our games, where he would polish in station wagons. I remember when Gratz played um, for the Public League Championship the year of the school strike. If I'm not mistaken, that was 73. How he piled in his station wagon Gratz basketball players to make sure they got to the game. There were no buses because the schools were on strike. Everybody was shut down. And Harold piled players into that station wagon to get them down to the Palestra so they could play that championship game. This is strong, y'all. This is strong. That your life is such that the community says, put him on the wall. We want people to see him. And he was so proud of that. Because you go through the city, there's a mural of Dr. J. And Harold's like, I'm on a wall too. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Because you've done so much for so many people. Harold was a lover of family. He loved his family. He loved his children. Harold is an author. Harold wrote a book about his mother. Yes, he wrote a book about his mom's life. His mother's name was Essie, and we connected on that tip because my grandmother's name was Essie. And so Harold wrote a book about his mother. So this accomplishment of Harold didn't stop. Harold loved music. And I told you we used to jam going up on our 8-hour rides, listen to music. But one day he came to my house and I went and he drove down. He drove down to my house. And we hung out. I think it was either a Christmas dinner about 11, 12 years ago, whatever. And so he wanted to listen to some music. So he brought his music case in. And I was like, man, I got music. He said, boy, I got music. Harold was a lover of Michael McDonald. He loved jazz. He had some old school Commodores. So I downloaded all his stuff. I took his CDs and downloaded all that and put it on my library. And we talked about that. Harold played the guitar. He's self-taught. And he would play the guitar and he learned music. He didn't know music and he taught himself music. 86 years old, he exercised until about 3 or 4 years ago. A steady routine, push-ups, bike riding. He still has the equipment in his house. Harold was an example. He was an example of a person that decided to live life at a quality of comfort, a quality of purpose, and a quality of character. He was a comfortable guy. Harold did. The big stuff wasn't the issue with him. He made sure he had a Cadillac, though. He made sure he had a Cadillac. But he lived a simple life. He lived a simple life that included loving people on the phone, calls, visiting. His big thing about going to Philadelphia was how many people he could visit. Not how many people could come see him, how many people he could go see. He loved his sisters. He loved his children. He loved his brothers. His family was very important. And family was very important because we who knew Harold became his family. We were his sons. We were his daughters. We were his nephews, his nieces, his grandchildren. That's what we became. He always called us the guys. The guys. Until the end, he thought about the guys. Last Monday, a week ago today, myself, Antoine, Terrell, Aaron Greer, we was with Harold. I was in Atlanta, and I got a text from Harold's son about Harold being in the hospital and what had happened as far as that situation. And it was my prayer, knowing that this was probably going to be the day he transitioned. It was my prayer that God would allow Harold to stay with us until I got a chance to see him. So I drove like a bat out of hell. To all the people who are on I-95 and I-85 on my trip from Atlanta up to Winston-Salem, I'm sorry I did that to y'all, but I had to see my dude. I got up to Winston. Well, I went to High Point, picked up Antoine, and the squad was there. Aaron met us at the hospital. It was tough, but we knew it was time. And Harold kept asking, am I going to be all right? And I told Harold, you're going to be all right. And I asked Harold if he wanted to go home to be with his mom. And he said yes. And I told him to go ahead. And for Harold, and knowing that his his faith and his relationship with his Savior, Jesus Christ. We talked about that and just made sure everything was all right, that he had peace and that he was at peace with his relationship. And when that was confirmed, he was struggling talking, but he was very aware of who was in the room. And he asked the question, am I going to be all right? And I told him yes. And with all the trust that he has in our relationship and the love he has for me, he asked, was I sure? And I told him, if I'm sure of anything, I'm sure you're going to be all right, Harold. Go ahead home. And he went home. He went home that evening. And every conversation that we have, I would always say, I love you. And he'd always say, I love you, Aaron. Harold is, not was, because his presence is here. Harold is a friend. And out of all the things that he was to me, he is my friend. And the Bible says, if you want a friend, show yourself friendly. You really couldn't get a better friend than Harold Barnes. He was consistent in friendship. He was faithful in friendship. He was loving. He was empathetic. He was compassionate. And if you ever in your life have an opportunity to be a friend like Harold Barnes, do it. But it's going to take work. It's something that you do every day. It becomes a habit. Loving, caring for, considerate, putting yourself on the back burner. That was my guy. There's a lot of honors bestowed to Harold. I don't know. I just couldn't stop. And so when we had our jazz event about 8 years ago, we gave Harold the Lifetime Achievement Award from North Philly Project, the very first one. Who else? There is no North Philly Project without Harold Barnes. There's no Aaron Wells without Harold Barnes. Not this one. It was the one before, but not this one. So many of us can say that. Will say that. Proud to say that. As I shared with people and others shared with people that Harold had transitioned a week ago today, people who have never met Harold, but who know his guys, all were in grief and mourning because knowing us, they understood the impact and the influence he has, not past tense, that he has in our lives. So when I honor the life of Harold Barnes, which I will do until somebody's doing it for me, as I honor the life of Harold Barnes, I will always think about the fact that he took the time. Yeah. And a good friend told me that he made the time. A good friend once told me that time is made. People say I don't have time. Well, time is made. And he made time for us. He made time for us when we were knuckleheads. And he didn't just make time for the superstars. He made time for all of us. And some of the people who are the closest to Harold were not the superstar ball players. It was the guys who missed layups, had mismatched socks, right? It was the guys who, you wouldn't pick them in a game if it was just 5 people and you needed 10. You wouldn't pick them. Harold would. Harold used to shoot around with us, and we used to laugh at him. That old flat-footed set shot. But he used to shoot our eyes out. Yeah. If you're here, thank you for hanging out. Share it. It's a different Wellness Chronicles tonight. I don't mind. It's my platform. I want to honor my guy. Only twice have I prayed that prayer. It's when my mother was transitioning. I had to get from North Carolina to Philadelphia. I said, God, let her hold on so I can be with her. He honored that. I said, God, let Harold hold on so I can see him. And he knows that I'm there. God honored that. I miss Harold. It's only been a week, and I miss him because we talked all the time, checked on him all the time. It became my daily routine, making sure that Harold was all right. Antoine, Aaron, that's what we did. His church made sure dude was all right. Well, Harold, you're all right because you duplicated yourself. You invested in others. You saw the worth of people, and you did it in North Philly. So the question is asked in the Bible, right? Can any good thing come from Nazareth? They were talking about Christ. The question is, can any good thing come from North Philly? Absolutely. Absolutely. Harold saw it and still sees it. Those Eagles that won last night, our squad, what? You don't know? Hey, Harold was a lover. He was an avid Eagles fan. So last night when they started giving the ball to Zeke, the Eagle killer, I said, all right, Harold, you're going to have to do something about this. So I don't know what you believe or think, but when the Eagles finally made sure that offense from Dallas was stopped, and we got that ball back, I attribute that to Harold Barnes saying my team is going to win. Him and my sister Ted, they love the Eagles. I am so happy that I am a part of his life. I'm happier that he was a part of my life. So I just wanted to honor my guy tonight. Yep, this is a different one. I don't know. I think he's worthy of it. He deserves it. His services are in Philly this coming Saturday. There's going to be a lot of people there. I won't have the honor to be there because I'm traveling this week. I have a conference down in Dallas, Texas, so I'll be headed down there with my Eagle stuff on. So come Saturday, while everybody is remembering Harold and saying goodbye to Harold, I'll be flying back from Dallas. But my thoughts won't be about saying goodbye to Harold. My thoughts are going to be on everything that Harold has done for my life. And people often thank me for the time I spent with Harold these last 10 years and the attention and the love. I tell them all the time, he paid it forward. When that no basketball playing 12-year-old walked into that center, scared because I was down the village and I lived up the Tenderlines, not as good as the worst player on the court, not knowing anybody except a couple of guys that came up from 31st Street to talk me into going down to work on my game. He put me on the team. Not a pickup team. He put me on the team. Referees, books, uniforms. And I was usually the uncoachable jerk. He always tells the story that my first game, the biggest guy on the court that I fouled out, no points, 5 fouls, 1 rebound, no blocks. But he stuck in there with me as a player, as a person, as a son, and in my adulthood as a man, a brother, and a friend. Can't beat that. And we need more of that. So tonight, I honor my friend Harold Barnes. I'm thankful to God that he placed us in each other's lives and in the universe at the same time. I thank God that he shares my love for North Philadelphia. Because, man, it ain't nothing like North Philly, baby. Harold and I used to always say, when we come home, right, we look at the different parts of North Philly, how North Philly has been divided. Because when I grew up, North Philly was the largest, it was a chunk. It was the largest part of Philadelphia. Now it's Brewery Town and all this old stuff. But up until just last week, Harold and I both agree. It's all North Philly, baby. All of it. I'm gonna miss my guy. My rides home are going to be different. My evenings are different because I can't just pick up the phone and call him. But his presence is here, and I can talk to him. But mostly, what I can do is live a life that makes him proud. And I can keep building North Philly Project. I can keep helping people. I can keep serving and loving family. I can keep doing those things that shows the impact and the influence in the life of Harold Barnes. Appreciate you, Ted. Going to continue with his legacy because it's in us. All right, that's it for me tonight. We'll get back with panel and talking about community next week. In a traditional sense, but talking about Harold Barnes is talking about community. Talking about Harold Barnes and remembering Harold Barnes is remembering community. It's remembering Strawberry Mansion. It's remembering North Philly. Any good thing come out of North Philly? You bet. I love you. Take care of yourself. Share this. I'm going to. It's just me loving my guy. This is Aaron Wells. North Philly Project presents the Wellness Chronicles, community conversations exploring life in marginalized communities and how to ignite social change. You want to know how to ignite social change? See the world as Harold Barnes did. Make a difference. Jump in there. Become a part of others' lives for the better. And we'll see social change ignited. All right? I love you. I'll holler at you. We'll talk real soon. Peace.